So, as a part two, you could very well say that I'm going off on a strange ADD trail here, but the perplexing thing is how it ties directly into what I'm discussing. Um, I kind of started to get away from a lot of the things that Nathaniel Gillis was conjecturing because he was misinterpreting my communications with him. Um, he's at an age where he needs like affirmation for his sort of life work. And when you get to my age and you realize, and you've gone through what I've gone through as a battle scarred spiritual warrior, if you want to laugh about that, you can, but um, I would be very amiss, very, very careful about what and who you laugh about. And it's not a warning or a threat from me. It's from the field, and that's what the point is here. Is that there are these pre-selected. So when you talk about forms and you talk about shapes, um, you know, like the tesseract, right? Um, you've got the hailing of specific number systems that are really leading people to the worship of a dead end number system, right? So when you're, and this may seem extremely abstract, but the number five is a very, it's a pivotal point because you have five, which exists on the pi side, and I loosely call it pi, and I refer to this as left hand practitionership or practitioner mathematics. That, in other words, you believe that the circle, or really the half circle, or pi, is a constant, and it's not leading through a presupposition of a dead end algorithm back into a sort of flat time conceptualization, right? That you really don't have pi, you have two halves of a whole, right? That there's always a Planck wall or a segmentation that occurs there. Not that that specifically goes toward that measure, but it's sort of I'm not going to say law because I really don't. I like to stay away from those types of allegations that some sort of law dictates over us. But when you live within the construct of a certain universal quality, right? Even if that dimensional aspect of a universe was built on the presuppositions of a finite measure. In other words, this is not the main universe. And I just use universe very loosely. It's almost like the arms that branch off of a theoretical Merkaba, right, in motion. And it's nearly impossible not to use, at least for me, sort of esoteric terms because it is such an esoteric observable property or substance that comes from this. And I'm absorbing a lot of different information. I'm looking at the Gnostic informant and how he had invited Amon Hillman into his life, and how convincing somebody like that is, but how they reach their final status in chaos. Like you could say, oh, the guy was a teacher. He probably, I'm not going to get too far into this. He probably experienced molestation himself and fractionated and had to deal with this, right? But then this gets into number systems and non-Euclidean spherical mathematics and how we are being manipulated, and even more so how we're being compartmentalized and segmented. So that when you want to become more, you have these other two factors, these other two persona or personality that have, before you were even born, locked onto you. That it was a planned access to the algorithm to be able to decide what personalities or persona would be linked or locked onto you where you would either through trial and error and great sacrifice, right, um, be able to become the prevailing personality that won out these, I'm going to say the anima and the animus, um, sort of, if you could picture this, sort of pre-exist as two other states from a male and female sense, but I don't think always a male and female sense, right? And that you would have these two other base personas that were locked onto you as the active potential at the time, and that you would have to go through such sort of ingratiating, right? Like when we talk about accretion, that there's like these mathematical constants of you going through these arcane and esoteric feats. For instance, what was it? Everything, everywhere, all at once. I don't know if I got that right. I just watched it. I know it came out in 2022, but um, it's exactly like that, where you do these seemingly absurd or abstract things that you would never do, and then the green light goes on, and you're able to push a button, and you're sort of transmuting into another universal aspect, because it was something that was so unregistered or unseen by the populace of the time, right? Which is a number system. So it seems like I'm really going off on a trail here, but this is highly important to be able to look at and begin to understand and wrap your head around, because this is what I understood and knew, and why I would tap things 3 times when I was like 1 or 2 years old. I realized that the only thing that would keep away these entities that I heard having full on conversations about me before I could even really speak or understand, like my memories of it is so clear, right? And the other thing that I would do is I would never, when I finally was walking at the age of 2 or 3, I wouldn't step on cracks. If I went for a walk with the family, I would see the blocks beneath me. I would have a sort of strange understanding that these aren't right. This isn't using correct mathematics. And in fact, this is like I had the distinct understanding that this is a setup, right? So you could say, was I an undiagnosed schizophrenic, or was I seeing something and not? And I also saw and I'm going to say no, I was not, and I am not. And in fact, the validation of that is to see how there's a tear in the universe that's coming apart. And it was this exact revelation that I was pulled off from my. So when you look at the male aspect of a primal resonance, right? That male aspect was battling with a female aspect, and what was happening all along was the truth of who I am. As you could, people really get turned off by this, but you kind of have to use this. And when you're referring to sacred geometry, there is a divine shape, right? And Cliff High gets into this a little bit, and he doesn't allude to this, but there's a certain pyramidical angle or structure that he actually had made, that exactly matches what I witnessed about 4 years ago, up in Northern California. And the first thing that caught my eye was this light that looked like these geese flying from a distance, right, of a couple miles away. And I'm looking at it, clear night sky, winter. It's about 12:30 a.m. And I'm looking at it, and I notice at first, just kind of out of the corner of my eye, that looks like geese flying. And I look back up because I realized, what are geese flying at this time, and why is it such a sharp angle, right? And if you want to look at what Cliff High posted today, you could go on Substack, which is his original posting channel. I don't even think he's aware or doesn't care. I think he would care though, that he's pretty much a stickler on where he posts up. I don't even think he knows that there is a YT YouTube channel. that's posting his stuff up. But I digress. So I'm looking at it, and I'm noticing this very sharp angle, and it just seemed like, okay, that's a little too sharp to be natural. It's almost an aggressive angle. Like if you saw geese flying in that way, it means that they're probably in some sort of defense posture in haste, right? But it was moving very slow and deliberately. And I noticed after looking up at it that that thing is headed in my direction. So I'm watching it move no more than 15 to 25 miles an hour. In fact, it never changed speed. And it may have been even closer to around a median, of 20 miles per hour. But as I say, it didn't vary in speed at all. The light was just as distinct from a distance as it was close up. In other words, by it getting closer to me, it never became brighter. It was just as bright. I got to say, yeah, it maintained its brightness. And as it came ever closer to me, I realized that it was coming within 50 to 100 feet away from me. So I'm watching it. I'm watching it come closer and closer and closer. And I'm noticing very, very much so that it is a shape much like that very sharp, angular, pyramidal type structure, triangular structure. And it is either Vanta black or cloaked. The reason I say cloaked is because I could almost like see right through it, right? But I think it may have been so Vanta black. And again, it came so close to me that it was almost like something in your head where you're going, man, I wish I was a little closer to that because I could get a much better view. Well, it kept moving closer. It was going by my right side, and there were power poles as well as trees and a structure, a house, just below that. In fact, it was called the Spirit House, and it was up in the Grass Valley area at this time. And I had my phone inside, but it was like I can't remember, but it was a Samsung. It was a nice phone, but I knew that by running in, just reaching into my van and grabbing it, that it wouldn't have, that I probably wouldn't have been able to capture much. But I wish that I did at this time now, obviously, because it was just like right there. But it was the type of thing where you're not really thinking about that. You're more curious about, what am I looking at? Is this unique at all? Like, am I just sort of seeing things? Because there you have it. I mean, they weren't running lights. There weren't any other lights flashing. It wasn't like a sort of FAA type system. In fact, why there are lights on top of it at all, I have no idea. So as it's moving around, I'm watching it, and I'm watching it now, like I can see directly. Like I say, I almost feel like I was almost only about 50 feet away. I'm looking at it, and I'm noticing that it does have some detail to it, but again, it was almost like the type of black that just absorbed, as if it were cloaked, right? And I'm looking at it, and the lights weren't so bright that they took away from or obscured being able to look at the actual shape. Like, you could see the shape and the sharpness to it. And it may have only been anywhere between what I would estimate as 17 to 25 feet long. And it seemed to be moving so slow and deliberately that it was only probably going as slow as 15 to 25 miles per hour. I think even closer toward 15 miles an hour is probably not embellishing at all. And I've tried to keep the memory of it intact without adding anything to it over the years. And in fact, I did do a video, like, it may have been right after, or it may have been the next day. So I'm watching it, and my jaws literally dropped because I'm going, what the hell is that? As it got closer, it became very obvious, but it was almost as if I had to see it close up to realize, wow, because if it was any further away, it would be like, okay, that's just because there is like an Air Force base around there, right? And so it turns and starts to go in it just almost does like a loose L sort of turn and then heads away. And now that I look at it, I'm like, that may have been a really high tech drone, right? Um, a very high tech drone. And now I'm thinking, because there were so many like pot farms and stuff around that area, what was it gathering and garnering information, intelligence? But then I think, why would they spend something that was probably, millions of dollars to produce? Why would they spend that much money to do something that they obviously had, ability access through satellite systems and things like this? So I think I'm going to do a part three to this, and just try to keep these videos a little shorter. But I mean, what do you think? I'm still up in the air about it. I never thought that, oh, this is like an alien ship. I've seen orbs before, many years ago in 1991. I witnessed these black orbs, and I won't really get into that story, and I've said it many different times, but I witnessed it over at least a 15 to 25 minute period. I was accompanied by somebody at that time that was a researcher, a young, I think, postgraduate student through Stanford, and he was a marine biologist, right? And he lived at my mother's. He was renting a room from my mother's house at that time, and we hung out a few times, knew each other fairly well, and we had just gotten through playing some darts together, having a couple of drinks. I wasn't like completely inebriated, and I think we may have even like smoked some weed, but it wasn't like some strong. Like, we were able to take a casual stroll later at night there, and just sort of, you know, walk and stroll and chill, Um, and I think this was like later on in the evening when there really wasn't any buzz or anything like that. And I was looking up, and I noticed what I saw was these black balloons over, and it was again kind of a daunting moment where it was like, at first I thought, oh, those are balloons from a party, because this community center, it was just directly over this community center visually, right? Um, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking, and then I'm going, wait, it's too late. It's around midnight here, or a little bit later, and I'm looking up at and then right when I thought that, and I looked at it, it sort of like almost like stopped, like it had this movement, and then it would just stop, right? Um, and I'm like, that's weird, you know. And then I look a little closer, or I look a little bit more intensely at it, and I'm noticing that it looks more like an orb. It does not look like a balloon. I can't see any like bottom part or string or whatever. Like, what is that, right? Really got my curiosity up. And then as it's moving, I couldn't really tell that there was at first an orb behind it, but tracing it, it's here, and then there's another one behind it at a further distance, right? That's a little bit higher and further away, and they seem to be moving in a very similar way, where they will sort of like move and then stop, move and stop, right? But they're almost, it's almost like if you were to take a laser light and move it, it's almost like you almost had the feeling that it's being projected, but at the same time, there it is, right? If that makes any sense. So it's moving, and it starts out, and the whole, winter night sky, this is like in December of 1990, I think, is wide open. And I'm trying to figure it out, because as I'm watching this move so slowly, right? And then the other one's kind of trailing behind it. Suddenly a third just sort of transitions, appears. And so I'm watching it and I'm looking around like, how is this thing moving, you know? And strangely in my mind, I'm thinking, is this like, even though I wasn't articulating this, I was thinking, is this like some kind of electromagnetic? There's that feeling, where I'm looking at, is this being controlled by a greater object? And what I did begin to notice, and what I said to the person I was with was, is the whole sky, does it seem like is there a seam there? Like to where we think we're looking at the sky, right? Um, and it looks just like it's mimicking or copying the entire skyline, but is that just like what's going on there? And I could almost see something like that where it seemed like that whole area was being cloaked, right? For lack of a better. And so what got me back to that was, as this thing is moving so slowly, so deliberately, and then finally comes to these three stars that are like in a pyramidical type position, right, up in the night sky. These three orbs start to take on the form of those three pre-existent stars and then dilate into them. And in my mind, I'm going, what am I looking at? I'm going, this has the appearance that they dilated into these star systems, but is there an object up there that I cannot see that looks like it's perfectly right? Because there's no feeling that there's an object there, and there's no real feeling of distance. Like I can't tell you how far those orbs were away from me. Obviously, they weren't right next to me. They weren't, that close. But I couldn't tell if they were just a football field or two um, away at first. But then as they began to move, it seemed like I'm watching something that's several miles away, you know, rather than just within half a mile, to a mile away. It almost seemed like they started out a little closer and sort of um, you know moved a little further from my position, um, and there wasn't really anything that I could garner if I were to have stepped right or left and gotten some sort of parallax view confirmation, right? Um, and it was extremely clear. It was in winter time. I asked the guy I was with, and I stood there, and he was actually kind of like, "Well, let's go. Like, what are we doing?" But I was insistent on standing there because I'm like, "Do you see this? Like, can you describe? Can you explain what is that?" Right? So anyway, I'm not going to get into any more conjecture about it, but there's part two, and maybe we'll do a part three on this.